Today, I'm so thrilled to get started. This is our inaugural episode of Nobody's Perfect. This episode's going to be a little different than the ones we have moving forward. And this is really the episode that tees up why Nobody's Perfect is a conversation worth having right now. It is framed from the experience and research that we've done at NAMI Arapahoe Douglas counties over the last 5 years to serve youth and families in the communities that we work with. And really, our goal today is to frame the what, the why, and the how. Today, I'm joined with my guest, Amy Staley, who is a licensed social worker. She works with me at NAMI Arapahoe Douglas counties, and we have been really entrenched in how do we better support youth and families in today's world. And Nobody's Perfect is the kind of kickoff for that work that we're doing to move the needle on better supporting those in times of need and their struggle. Amy, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Jason. I feel honored to be a part of this inaugural episode, and I'm so glad to be here and talk about Nobody's Perfect and how we landed here.
Well, it's a pleasure for me. And I know we've been going back and forth on what this episode was going to be like for a while, knowing that it's different than the coming episodes. But really, before we get started, Amy, I would love for you to share a little bit more about your background and how you've been working to support youth in your career, really over the past decade. And then let us use that to kind of lead into the work that we've been doing at NAMI Arapahoe Douglas counties to serve the communities we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you shared, I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Colorado. I worked in a varying roles as a social worker really over the past 18 to 19 years. Even before I went back to grad school, I worked at a domestic violence shelter. I did go to Boston University for my master's in social work. And while out there, I worked at a teen living program, which was a shelter for parenting and pregnant teen moms. I then, after I graduated, and throughout my master's program, I worked with youth impacted by gang violence and their families. And when I moved to Colorado, I did intensive in-home work with youth as well. Part of my career, I did transition up to being a supervisor and a manager in community mental health, and then as well as a director of a Colorado-based behavioral health hospital on their outpatient program. In those roles as a supervisor, manager, and director in mental health, I often had touch points with youth programs. So while some of my work was adult facing, I also worked with programs that were an intensive outpatient program for youth, a hospital step down program for any kids and youth that were stepping out of crisis. I myself also, as a supervisor, did crisis evals at times on youth. So I've really had a touch point and a button on what happens for youth in the crisis world for mental health. After my directorship with the behavioral health hospital, I actually worked within the Colorado school system for about 3 years. And that was right during COVID and remote school and all of the things that that brought to our world, but really specifically the amount of pressure and that brought to youth as they were navigating schools in a whole new way, how to communicate and engage with each other, how to communicate with their families in a new way. So I really got to see from the front lines and working in schools, both as a social worker as well as the exceptional student services director, supporting a special ed department and our mental health team. Just the intensity day to day that comes within schools, and through that process, there's a lot that sparked in me of recognizing the amount that our youth have been in crisis and are in crisis, and even more recently and post-pandemic, have we seen what this looks like for youth and their families. And really, I'm excited to be here today to talk about how do we support families and youth and talking about these things and help educate folks.
Well, what I love about having you here today, and thank you for sharing your background, is you really have been with me on the ground floor of doing this work with youth from the very beginning. And I think the inspiration for Nobody's Perfect began back in 2019 when I was in conversations with Bonneville Media, Cozy 101, who is our generous supporter of this initiative. um, had asked me would I be willing to host a podcast for youth
Yeah.
after a rash of suicides in Colorado. And from 2019 through 2021, we hosted 35 episodes with youth around issues that they were facing or related to their mental health on a podcast called Teen Talk. And Teen Talk was really a phenomenal starting point for the work that we have gone on to continue and build upon. And really, what I learned from that, what I'm calling a For Youth by Youth initiative, was a couple of things. One, that youth will talk about mental health in a way that many of us won't as adults. Two,
Hmm.
recognizing that they are struggling, at alarming rates and really seeking support in their peer groups and with others. And we're going to give some statistics that validate this in just a minute. But really, the thread that I saw pulled through every single conversation was this desire or need that teens and youth today felt to be perfect, and
Yeah.
the recognition and the pressure that they felt around getting the right grades, doing the right, extracurricular or social activities that would look good on a college application, really about their next steps that felt so far afield from where they were in their present lives, that there was this anxiety and this underlying current of perfectionism that really framed these conversations. And as time has moved forward, what we've really done in a thoughtful way at NAMI ADCO, with Amy's help also, is looking at intentionally, where are the disconnection points among youth today? And one of the things that we recognized very early on is we have parents that are trying to raise kids today in a world that's very different in the world than they grew up in. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously the integration of technology has changed many things, and we find that instead of becoming more connected, we're often becoming more disconnected, in our roles in parents, in our roles as educators, people who support youth. These conversations we're hosting here is really foundational in us, creating new inspiration points to have, inspired conversation with youth today, to learn from them again, for youth by youth. I mean, the work that we're doing here has all been validated by youth, in topics and things that they are focused on and looking for support with, and really guides us as we move forward to have these raw, honest conversations that sort of break down these walls around nobody is perfect, recognizing that we all have a story and our stories have value. And frankly, hosting conversations that lead to deeper connection and conversation. I mean, that's my goal for this series. So
Hmm.
today I mentioned the episode is going to be a little different. I'm really hopeful we can get into kind of the what, the why, and the how. And I want to start with the why. And I've just shared a little bit of the why. But Amy, what I would love for you to do is tell our listeners a little bit about the work that we've been doing in the last year and a half at NAMI Arapahoe Douglas County, specifically related to, teeing up, getting ready for these conversations.
Absolutely. So, one of the projects that we have done was actually brought up through Douglas County. And Douglas County had initially reached out to us to get the voice of individuals who are living with serious and mental illness, as well as their families, because at NAMI, that is one of our core values, is really bringing to light the voice of people who are personally impacted with mental health issues and their families. And so we were honored that we were approached to seek this feedback. And through our stakeholder conversations, it became very evident that we needed to extend this survey process to youth. Um, Many more youth are presenting earlier with episodes of psychosis. Many youth are experiencing crisis. And so we went back to Douglas County and, in collaboration with the stakeholders, decided to also develop a survey that went out to youth and their families to seek feedback about what they understand they have access to in regards to services for mental health, and what ways they think of mental health, and where do they go for support, or what do they think we need to know more about. And so through that process, a few things really came to light that I think stood out to us as we compiled the data and reported it back to the Douglas County Mental Health Initiative. A couple of the data points that really stood out is One, approximately 74% of youth reported their overall physical and emotional health is fair. So this was
Wow.
second to lowest. This was out of five choices. So there's excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor. And nearly 74% of them chose the second to the bottom.
So let me
And
make this clear. Like, of the five choices that were given, we were at the second to the bottom in youth reporting how they felt about their mental and physical health.
correct. And if we add poor, which is below that, we're actually closer to 77, 78%. So nearly 80% of the youth said fair or poor.
Or we
Um,
could go ahead and say the majority.
yes, absolutely. Yes. And so I think, even as I'm looking at my notes and I saw that bar graph, I got the chills, right? When you just sit back and think about that when we engaged youth to share with us their perspective of how they're doing and their physical and emotional health, and that many of them are reporting fair or worse than fair, I think it's really important for us to pause and to realize what do we need to do to be responsive. In addition to that, there was a question that we asked side by side, meaning it was the same for the parents as the youth. And it went into more of a detail. So during the past 4 weeks, how much of the time has your physical health or emotional health interfered with your social activities? So interfered with you doing something. Again, we're at nearly 70% of youth either said all of the time or most of the time.
Wow.
So we're at nearly 70% that are saying that their physical or emotional health in the last 4 weeks impacted them in not engaging socially, which we all know as humans, the social connection is something that is positive for us. It helps us, it keeps us going, it keeps us feeling positive and alive. So if we have something that's impeding for somebody not to be able to have those emotional connections, how is that potentially also continuing to negatively impact them and their emotional health?
Well, and
So when
especially for youth when that's such a formative part of their socialization and becoming who they're going to become as young adults.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so when you look at the family responses and how many of them said all of the time or most of the time, it was only 8.33%. So when we look at these data points that we're at nearly 70% of youth are saying that their physical or emotional health interfered with their social activities, and then the family response was closer to 8.3, there's a big disconnect there of okay, so maybe parents are feeling like youth are doing okay or things are going well or from their perspective it's good. But when youth are identifying themselves, they're reporting that they're not feeling as good, right? And those some of those are the data points that I think really sort of sparked the importance of our overall goal for this podcast, which is how do we help have productive and practical conversations that youth and family can go back and try and have some of these conversations with each other. We understand, as you mentioned, it's a very different time growing up today than it was, you know, even 10 years ago, we'll say, but as we look at the generational gap and difference in age between parents and youth today, it's a different time. And so having conversations in ways that parents may have had when they were younger, it is different. And we don't fault anyone for not feeling like there's a clear roadmap of how to have these conversations. We want to help provide folks with some tools and opportunities and conversation starters for engaging with their youth around this. We'd love to see that gap close in regards to the discrepancy of perspective of how impacted youth are and how the adults see that, right?
Well, and
Um,
and I wanna add right here, again, as you just mentioned, this is not about bashing parents, like, making anybody feel bad about their parenting skills. I mean, we recognize through survey that parents are struggling too, and knowing
mhm.
how to talk to their youth about some of these things that their kids are challenged with is not straightforward, and it's not easy, and it goes back to, as Amy mentioned a minute ago, the world is different. I think this conversation or these conversations really in my mind, is an opportunity for us to recognize the gaps and then to start filling in the gaps. Like, I don't
Mhm.
have an expectation that we're going to fix anything necessarily, but if at a minimum we can spark, youth and teens and their parents having healthier conversations that strengthen and deepen connection, I think we will have done a great job here. So, Amy, you gave us some staggering statistics a minute ago around the challenges that youth are facing and how they perceive their mental health is, and then conversely, how differently their parents may see it and not
Mhm.
recognize they're struggling at such an alarming rate. Help us better understand, why do you think that is, that youth are perceiving their mental health as, fair or poor, and parents might see it as good, on a more consistent basis? What are the things that, from the work that we've been doing, you recognize as some things that would give us pause, that build upon in what we're doing here?
Sure. Well, a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think one, you kind of touched on the access to technology, but I'm going to expand that and just say access to information.
Okay.
So, the amount of information that youth have to educate themselves in whatever fashion that is surrounding mental health, surrounding emotional needs, some of that can result in potentially over attaching or over identifying with some of those pieces. And then I'm not minimizing that youth aren't experiencing some of those pieces, but youth are able to look things up and access that information in regards to their emotional and mental health at a much faster rate than I know was available when I was youth.
Of course.
So I also think there are some pieces that youth have access to this information and are seeking that information potentially from their peers, potentially from other online resources, rather than direct mental health resources. And we can talk a little bit more about some of the data points we got from our work related to that in a minute. But I also think that, when we talk about this, nobody's perfect. And you already touched on the parenting piece. I think as parents, we all put a lot of pressure on ourselves to know and to have right answers and to be able to be responsive to youth. And when we're walking in a situation that feels like we don't have a direct answer, it is a different world. I'm not sure how to respond or to answer if you have this coming up. I think as parents at times, when we don't know the answer, we try and connect with resources, or we try and find information or get our youth connected, but we might instinctively freeze and not want to give misinformation. And so we might not be engaging in some of these conversations with youth out of our own pressure for wanting to be perfect or wanting to be that support for our youth. And
Right.
so I think there are times that, when we talk about nobody's perfect, we absolutely want to target and address what you brought up earlier, where youth are putting a lot of pressure on themselves to be perfect. But we also want to acknowledge that parents feel that pressure too. I'm a parent of two, and while my kiddos are younger right now, 3 and 6, I often am like, "Oh, man, I should have done that different, or could I have done this different?" Right? We constantly, it's ingrained in our society for how can we be responsive and what can we do? And so I think there's so many layers that go into your question that can also just be, what are generational, different values too? What are
Right.
values of parents that might be like, "Hey, yeah, I am looking at this. And to me, I think you're probably not that impacted, although you feel like you are," right? There could be some generational differences in what the reality of the person's situation is, or how big something feels. I mean, what we know about adolescent minds, and where they're at developmentally, there might be some things that feel very huge for them or do take up a lot of their emotional space. And their parent might look at the same thing and see it as much smaller,
Well,
right?
and why are
So,
you giving this any attention when they don't see the value? I mean, I just want to acknowledge the conversation that you and I had before we started recording around, we want this to be perfect.
yeah,
And knowing, again, I want to reiterate what Amy's saying. I don't think perfectionism is something that is just a youth problem. I think it's a
yeah,
people problem. And really, we're hoping to kind of take the bricks off the wall, so to speak, and have these more honest, inspired conversations, and recognizing there is no need to be perfect. And Amy, you mentioned a minute ago about, parents feeling a certain pressure to meet their youth where they are when something comes up. And I still believe it is perfectly appropriate to respond and say, I don't know the answer, but
Mhm.
I'll see what I can figure out and I'll get back with you. And I think that goes a long way. I know we have some compelling survey points around this. I would love for you to specifically share more about what the data told us about youth's reliance on support, how they're accessing support, and really, frame for our audience a little bit more about the importance and value in recognizing that technology is pretty firmly integrated into the use case of what where youth are seeking support. And instead of vilifying it, our opportunity is taking on initiatives like this to integrate something in that is contextualized differently. Because I'm going to go back and add where I think we fail with technology specifically related to these conversations is, yes, there is access to anything out there that we want to find on the internet, good or bad. And often we seek something out and we get the answer we're looking for that may not have the appropriate context, provided with it, that really gives the full flavor of what somebody is going on to self-identify with, or they've seen themselves in the struggle of another person or another group of people. And there's a lot in this cultivation of identity among youth that makes kind of the integration of technology pretty dangerous.
Mhm. No, absolutely. And I think, um, that in and of itself may end up being its own podcast, because I think there's a lot of people that I know are more experts in that than I can even speak to. But I do think that we would be remiss to not point out how much technology is integrating into what is coming up for youth with as it relates to mental health. So when we talk about, and I just wanted to clarify the data point that you were hoping for me to touch on. Did you want me to touch on where youth are going in regards to peers versus other adults, or were you talking about where they might go to look up resources? I
I
just want to
think
make sure.
both. I think both are
Okay.
valuable for this
Okay.
conversation, don't you?
Okay. Yeah. 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 I just wanted to make sure that I integrated in well with that. So, when we asked youth where they go, where they seek support, and if they, an interesting side by side stat that really stood out to us was self care. Self care is discussed quite a bit in our society. We talk about things we can do for ourselves. We talk about how self care potentially can have a positive impact on our mental health and our overall health and well-being.
Right.
And when we asked youth if they felt that self-care can benefit their mental health, there was 48%, so almost 50%. And if you add the strongly disagree, that disagreed with this. They did not feel that self-care. And I think that that's an important stat to review, because as we look at then if they feel like they have the coping skills and things to work through when they have tough moments, almost 75% of them said they strongly agree. Actually, we're up to close to 90% that either agree or strongly agree that they feel they have the tools. And the reason that this data point is important is that this is almost acknowledging that youth do not feel they need the adults. Youth do not feel that they need help from somebody outside of themselves to manage distress, to manage things that are tough for them. And again, when we think of developmentally, right, youth often feel kind of like they're superheroes and they've got this and they don't need help. And right, like I'm almost an adult, I'm good, I'm good. So there's
Right.
components of that could be attached. But in reality, I think there are some pieces that we're uncovering and we've discussed that are also that youth aren't feeling connected to the adults. They aren't feeling that when they have those conversations, they're feeling seen and heard. And I think that that's an important piece for us to not gloss over. Additionally, when we asked if they talk with their peers about mental health, um, there's 92.8% said yes, they talk to their peers about mental health. So not only are they saying, I feel like I've got this, right? I have the skills that I need, I'm good. Also, 92% of them are talking to each other, potentially more than they're talking to adults or reaching out. When we look at where youth are going to look for resources to improve their own mental health, um, 36% of them are going online, and only 25% of them reported family. So I think it's very interesting, even if we just put those side by side, right? That there's that much more, 11% more that are reporting that they go online versus talking to a family member.
And I want to add something there. The 34% was the biggest category of respondents. Online was number one.
Yes, I'm
So
so
it
sorry.
came
And
before anything
it's
else.
30, it's almost 36%. I think I said 34 because I was looking, I
Sorry.
was jogging. So it's 36% of youth
Okay.
report that they are going online to seek resources for their mental health. And that is the first place they're going to improve their mental health. And it is the largest category that was responded. You are correct.
Right. And to add, thank you for clarifying. And to add to that, you talked a minute ago about the reliance on peer groups. And I love that youth have their peer groups as a support today. But I also want, with every light side, there is a dark side. The dark side of that is we often have peers that are collaborating, kind of in their muck. And it can often be a pretty dangerous place to navigate ups and downs of sick people helping sick people. And I don't want to be unkind about that, but I do believe that people can only meet you from their place of experience. And if you're struggling with something and reaching out to your peer group and they have no frame of reference to that other than they're your friend and they want to support you, that doesn't always lead to the healthiest outcomes. Is that, did I say that accurately enough?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that um, you know, one of the things that I've done in the field is a lot of trauma-informed care trainings and vicarious trauma trainings. And one of the pieces that I always touch on, that because I think some of this can be hard for adults too, right?
Sure.
Sometimes we find shared experiences, and so we connect with others who are having that shared experience, and it doesn't always result in us feeling better or getting to a better place. Not to say that it never does. But when I've done vicarious trauma trainings, one of the things I always say is you need to have a buddy or somebody you can unload to, but you need to start by saying, are you in a place that I can talk to you about this right now?
Right.
Are you, because sometimes what we do, I call it a trauma vomit, is we're all hyped up. I'm having a trauma reaction, and I just like vomit all the things that are happening to me or all of these other things that I've heard. And then I just tell you all these things. And you, Jason, might have been like, oh my gosh, I almost got in a car accident on my way to this. And I'm a little shaken up. And now I'm hearing all these things. You might not be in a place to actually be able to hear that and handle that. And when we're youth who are both struggling with different things, and then we talk about those different things, it can feel heavier and bigger, right? And so when you're talking about that, and not necessarily that there's always a positive outcome, or that might be people who are impacted by mental health helping each other. There's a lot of positives about that because there can be shared experience,
Sure.
but there also can be adding weight and adding additional stress and additional emotional strain to somebody else. And I'm comparing that with when I've done vicarious trauma trainings, because again, I want youth to hear some of what the reason we're talking about these, and we're talking about, hey, could there maybe be some other solutions or different ways to look at it, is not to say what you're doing is wrong, and to let you know these are things adults and others are navigating as well, right? All of us manage this. I'm pretty sure I've probably trauma vomited onto Jason once before, right?
And
That's
vice
just part of
versa.
what we do as humans. Yeah, like that's what we do as humans. It's more, how do we learn to recognize, whoa, when is this something that's really, really heavy that I might be putting on somebody else? And do I maybe need to get extra support, whether that is a resource through school, whether that is a family member, whether that is a mental health support? Do I need somebody else to help me navigate this so that I'm not putting something on somebody else? Or are they going to be able to help let me know if it is too much, right? How do you have conversations about, hey, I want to be a friend for you. I want to be here for you. But what you're sharing with me feels really heavy and outside of my scope. And I feel like we need to go together to talk with somebody, right? It doesn't, I want youth to feel like they can feel empowered to not have to hold all this heavy information. Because that's a lot. And I
And
know
the
I've
data
totally
tells
went on
us
a
that
tangent.
well, but the data tells it that they're reporting their mental health as fair or poor. And So it tells me that maybe they are not as equipped to be reliant on themselves and others when they start navigating the challenging times. And again, I'm not saying that they are not, but I think there's something that data supports. There are some issues here. And Amy, I know that Nobody's Perfect is designed to really be a hub of resources. And I want to get into that a little bit more, but where I'd like to start is this notion of, if somebody's struggling, and again, that could be across a continuum of care, it all the way from, I've had a bad day, through I'm in crisis and really need help right now. I see what we find a lot is there's not really a connection point for people to get plugged in. How do youth and parents or supporters of youth better navigate these challenging times, and where do they get plugged in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough answer because it's not a one size fits all answer, and
Right.
some of that is going to be unique for each youth and family member. I'm thinking to some of the work that I did in schools when there was a couple of youth that were in crisis, and I'm remembering there's a family member that said something to me like, "Well, I just feel so lucky that we have you because you know how to navigate the system." And I don't know how many times I've had that conversation with you that just sits with me, that it feels wrong and hard that that youth got their need met in that moment because I knew how to navigate the system. And I think everyone in the system right now wants to be responsive, wants to be supportive to youth. And also, our system has been flooded with mental health needs. I think that there was buildup probably before the pandemic around that, but definitely after the pandemic, we've seen um, the system be flooded, and the mental health workers also need to be taking care of themselves so
Right.
that they can be present for youth. So, there's a variety of ways that youth can get plugged in. They can start by talking to people through their schools, see if their schools have any resources or places that they partner with really well. In some areas that might be a community mental health, some it might be private group therapy practices, some non-traditional therapeutic interventions. Talking to their primary care office, we've definitely seen a significant increase in primary care offices being the front lines for people who are experiencing significant mental health needs while somebody's on a wait list. So if somebody's waiting 6 weeks to get into therapy and need some support, oftentimes people are going to their primary care offices and they're kind of trying to help triage. Obviously, every primary care office is navigating that differently. So you would want to talk with your child's pediatrician and figure out what resources they may or may not have, and not just assume that they can be responsive to that. But be aware that some folks are going through their primary care and then being referred out through there. Um, and we're working together on another project of looking at how can we create more in the moment resources, how can we create access to some self-empowerment tools or things that people can at online, whether that be for parents to review and read and pass on to their youth, or for youth to access themselves. We know that there's a significant shortage of support to be responsive, and we're trying to help come up with other ways that people can get tapped in, even through conversations like this, to navigate what can I do and how can I have conversations with my youth while I'm working to get them plugged in. How can I be persistent and understand that the system might be a little overloaded and I might have to make 2 or 3 phone calls before I get a call back. I'm not saying that's okay or that's what anyone's intention wants to be, right? I don't think that anyone would feels good about that, but that might be the reality of where we're at in society. And so, how as a parent can I help balance and give love and support to my youth while we're waiting to get them officially plugged in?
Right. And I want to reiterate a couple of things that you touched on a minute ago. And one of them is we truly have a demand on our mental health system that we've never had before. And the system was never designed to meet the demand that it has placed upon it today. And that's for adults and for youth. And really, youth resources have never been front and center for where the mental health system showed up to meet you at. And I think what you mentioned
Yeah.
a minute ago, Amy, that's so important, and I want people listening to take away is what's different about mental health from other physical maladies that people may struggle with is there is not a one size fits all solution. So if somebody is struggling with something, it doesn't necessarily mean the tools or the tactics that they use to support themselves are going to be the same that somebody else uses. And we recognize that. And again, this is not a podcast to be pro therapeutic resources or pro system resources. It's really to start having the conversations and opening the door, knowing these are not one size fits all challenges that people are facing, and really being more invitational to share with you from an expert perspective resources that are available that you might not have thought of or ever known you could rely on to make it, make you aware of, different paths that you can pursue or go down that may be a support for you. And also um, to underscore and highlight the fact that it's okay to try different things. And if something didn't work for you, that doesn't mean that you have to keep doing more of it, or maybe you shouldn't pursue a different path. So again, I want to level set anybody listening here today that we recognize that there are different paths to care. There are different options to support ourselves, when we're navigating, the ups and downs that we're facing in life. But, Amy, I know kind of the foundation of Nobody's Perfect is really built upon what we've learned, over the course of the last several years. And as part of that survey, we also asked youth things that they were struggling with. And much of the future episodes is going to be around topics of this for youth by
Mhm.
youth perspective that is validated from the youth voice about things that they are struggling with. Talk to us for a minute about what are the topics that we know youth are actively seeking support for, or would like to have more information on, to give our listeners a little more of a flavor for what's coming.
Absolutely. Before I dive into that, I have one comment I want to add to
Please.
everything that you just shared, because that's how you and I are. We just talk and talk. But I think it's very important when we talk about the not one size fits all that we also remember that each person is different. So, as adults and as parents who've potentially struggled with our own journey of our mental health or process, we might feel like, you know what, this worked for me, so I'm going to get my kid connected to this, right? And allowing yourself and your youth an opportunity to explore that what worked for you or what maybe worked for one of their siblings might not be the same thing that works for them, and
Right.
that that's okay. I think that it when we see a loved one who's in pain or who is suffering, our immediate pull is let me fix it, and sometimes we immediately go to what helped us fix things. And so I just want to um give permission for you to realize that there might be different avenues in that, and like you said, Jason, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing.
Well, and that's
So
that's such great. I love that word permission, and recognizing that we are all different. We all navigate life's ups and downs differently. And really, as a parent or supporter of youth who's listening, to recognize that what worked for you may not work for your teen. And
mhm,
and that's okay. And really, we hope to be an inspiration point here at Nobody's Perfect to really, give people access to resources that we know of because we work in the field and do this work across a spectrum of resources. And you guys have conversations with your youth that hopefully inspire you all to take different action that ultimately results in improved outcomes. Like that's really the goal here. But um yeah, I'm so glad that you brought us back to that, Amy, because I think that's really important to recognize the differences in each of us as we walk into a conversation to show up
mhm,
to support somebody we care about.
absolutely, yeah. And, thank you for leading into us exploring what youth shared. When we asked them what opportunities for more education for youth regarding resources, what do you think's needed, right? What should we be looking at? And almost 30% of them said prevention resources. 30% of youth are reporting that they would like to hear more about things they can do earlier on, things to be preventative to benefit their mental health. Um, 40% are looking for self management tools. 35% are saying how to talk to others about mental health. So we've already discussed earlier on the data points that 92% of youth are talking to their peers about mental health. How can we make sure that we're having conversations of how to support youth with talking about mental health? And that is part of our intention. And part of what drove this podcast is not only for youth to potentially walk away and think of other ways to talk with their family members, but also to talk to each other about mental health.
Well,
Um,
even
Go
as
ahead.
we talked, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say that, there's several others on here. A couple more that I would just like to point out is what to do when someone is in crisis and ways to access resources in the community. And those are, right at 30 to 33%. And people, youth overwhelmingly want to know what to do, want to know how to talk about this, and want to know where to go. And hope our goal of this podcast is to bring to light new and different resources and ways to access things in different ways, and to learn more about how to talk about these things. Hopefully the conversations will be approachable and practical and feel supportive to youth, because we recognize and we hear your voice that you want to have these conversations and you want to know what to do.
I love that. And I know we also had delved into, really specific topics that youth were looking for support around, which is really the starting point for the expert conversations that we're going to have moving forward every other week. And as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to address the topics like depression, anxiety, navigating technology with your youth today. I know substance use and misuse. Substance abuse and misuse is certainly a rampant problem that parents are facing with their youth. Disordered eating, bullying, gender identity, school violence, like no topics really off limits here. And we have found, in our work with youth that they're wanting more information about how to navigate these, as evidenced by, what our survey told us that Amy just reported. I mean, I think, again, I go back and I'm going to use the words level set again. We want to start to normalize some of these conversations, and pretending that these things are not impacting our youth, that they're not happening, that they're not being affected by them, and that parents aren't struggling to know how to talk about these things, and recognizing you don't have to be the expert to do that. I feel like we have an opportunity, and frankly an obligation, to show up differently for our youth and have conversations about the hard things that we know that they're challenged with and are facing, and really hopefully give a spark of inspiration to be able to navigate those times, those ups and downs, with greater ease and impact, because you're empowered with knowledge.
Mhm. Absolutely. I'm realizing we have about 7 minutes left, and so I want to be mindful about me not rambling too long. But
You're doing great.
okay. No, I think, you know, it's been fascinating for me going through doing the survey process with alongside you and talking about this youth work, because as a social worker, I've done a lot of direct practice with youth, and I clearly have a passion area for that. I really want youth's voice to feel heard and seen. Um, and I've also, it sparked me even through this conversation right now and us prepping for today, how much I'm also realizing the importance of the parents piece with that, and wanting parents to feel that they have the tools. And I'm sure some of that is where I'm at in my journey as a parent.
Right.
But it's been interesting to me, because I actually think that wanting parents to feel like they aren't alone and that they have ways to have these conversations or to access information is starting to feel equally important to me. How do we give parents some practical information on figuring this out? Because kids don't come with a manual. We all know that. We don't have a manual on navigating our lives. And how can we do our best to give our kids the skills and the tools to be their best selves, and allow ourselves those moments of perfection. Allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And as you said earlier, say, I don't know, but I'm going to help you come up with a solution or talk about it. And by modeling for youth that as parents, we can say we don't know, or I'm having a hard day and be vulnerable ourselves, hopefully that helps show them that nobody is perfect. And we're not here to be a perfect society or be perfect people. We're here to try and be our best selves and enjoy life the best that we can as we navigate the things that are really challenging and hard in the day to day life.
Well, I couldn't have said that any better, Amy. I absolutely and wholeheartedly agree with you. And it goes back to one of our taglines, perfection isn't real, but your story is. And that's what I love. When I started podcasting and doing my radio show, that I really loved was the opportunity to get together with real humans having real experiences and just really have conversations that make a difference, because frankly, I think the more that we talk about the things that we're uncomfortable with and we normalize those things, I think the easier it becomes for us to integrate them into our lives and recognize that, this notion of perfectionism that we've all been indoctrinated into believing is a necessity for a successful life. It's not real.
Mhm.
It simply isn't real. And the fact of the matter is the more that we can, I think, embrace our imperfections and have this shared humanness and experience with other people who are living their story, I think the better opportunity we have to strengthen and deepen connection to ourselves and others. And really, that is the goal. And as Amy mentioned a minute ago, at NAMI ADCO, we are actively working on a digital marketplace tool to better connect people to the resources that we're talking about here. But it is this podcast that is the inspiration point. It is because of you. So if you're listening and you are inspired by something that we said today, or it sparks, a thought that you want to share with us, I encourage you to go to our Nobody's Perfect page, which is linked here where you're listening, and really give us your feedback. If there's something that you're struggling with or you
Mhm.
recognize that you need more support with, share with us. Or if you're listening and you're an expert on a topic that you think you would be an ideal guest for a future conversation, by all means, reach out to us. Like, again, I want to reiterate, this is a for youth by youth initiative, which for us means it is validated by youth. First and foremost, our goal is to better serve youth, but we recognize that part of serving youth starts with educating the grown-ups in the room, the parents, the people who support youth, educators, etc. And frankly, we believe that the fruit of this initiative is better because of the input and the feedback that you give us. So I encourage anybody that's listened that wants to offer or share that, please do so. Um, Really gives us a springboard to continue moving this project forward in a thoughtful, inspired way. As we're wrapping up, Amy, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously this is the initial, the inaugural, I don't know the correct word. I'm blanking on it, but podcast, but part of our intent of having practical tools that youth and families can walk away with will be that we're going to ask two questions of guests on this show that are hopefully conversation starters for you. And I strongly encourage youth and their families, whether they listen to this together or listen to it on their own, but to come back to each other and ask each other, what's one thing that you learned or one thing that stood out to you from that? Because I think having the moments to have those conversation with your youth will either bring moments of connection where maybe there was one thing that we said today that stuck out to both of you, and it was inspiring that it was a moment of connection, or it could also bring opportunity for you to learn more about your parents and what's standing out to them, or to learn more about your youth and what they're hearing and what they're walking away with. Part of what is the challenge in the disconnect in navigating parenting these now is potentially not being able to have that lens and that understanding of where each other are coming from. And so that's one thing I would encourage folks to consider as you engage with this podcast, whether you do it regularly or it's a one time situation, is for you to walk away and talk to a family member, talk to somebody else, talk to a peer. Hey, what did you get out of that? Or what did you think? Because that's how we're going to learn to have those connections and learn that we're all coming at this from different perspectives and different things might be important to different people.
I love that, Amy. And that's a perfect conclusion to this first episode of Nobody's Perfect. Amy, I want to thank you so much for the valuable work that you're doing, the insights that you provided today. And I know that we'll have you back on the show in upcoming episodes, but thank you for being a champion for a cause that we know needs much attention. And I'm just grateful to you for being here today.
Well, thank you for including me. It was an honor to be on the first episode and really to be doing this work right now. I feel like it's bringing together a lot of my professional and personal experiences, and I am honored to be here and I appreciate the time.
Until next time on Nobody's Perfect, remember perfection isn't real, your story is. Until we meet again, we'll see you soon.